So I wanted to address a number of issues really related to the core creative practice. What I have identified here are a number of different aspects. Really, it all relates to professional creative practice and how one orientates within the context of creative professional practice to maximize the value that you can deliver. Um, Really, it comes from structured thinking. What I'm trying to do here is identify through some research inspiration and some established processes, find a heuristic or a set of heuristics that can be used really to support creative practice throughout the processes. Uh, Primarily, I'm talking about the design thinking process. I think it is really a very effective way of accessing professional creative practice, productive creative practice, because we have the five clearly identified stages within the design thinking process. And each one can be related to a form of thinking. So design thinking, both in terms of the artifact or other outcome, whether it's a material outcome or an experienced outcome, like a service, for example. Um, we can see that there are identifiable actions that we can associate with each of these five stages, and that's good. We can be productive and engaged, but we can also use a higher level perspective on the process to help manage the process and indeed manage our thinking down to the individual moment of our work. So with design thinking, we have five stages: empathize, define, ideate, prototype, test. Each of these five stages can be connected to two primary forms of thinking that we use within our creative practice, and that is thinking styles, really, divergent and convergent. So divergent thinking is opening up, and we would often indicate it on our whiteboard with an inverted arrowhead, the idea that we are open to receiving whatever presents to us. That also aligns with obvious elements of information gathering in projects like research. So we've got reading research about a topic, or visual research looking into the visual language in a particular category or domain. Um, so empathize is that first style of thinking where it is divergent. Then in the next phase, we switch to the second style of thinking that we focus on, which is convergent, coming to a point, getting to the point, grasping something, having a little gestalt moment of recognition. Um, what I mean by that with the gestalt reference is the idea that gestalt refers to the acquisition of anything within our experience, the foregrounding of something where everything else momentarily becomes backgrounded because our attention has converged on that particular element. So that's convergent thinking, coming to a point, divergent thinking, opening up. Um, Empathize is a opening up, divergent form of thinking. Define is a converging, focusing form of thinking. Ideate, again, opening up to what might be. Prototype, again, focusing, converging on a particular model that you need to generate. And then testing is where you open up to receive the feedback of the people who have been exposed to your design. Prototype. Okay, so that's the five main stages within the design thinking process. What we're talking about then is trying to identify how it is that we actually think in the moment, and how our awareness of that, or metacognizing of that. So metacognition is the higher level thought. So for example, when you ask a person how do they feel and they report back how they are feeling, there is a self that is doing the reporting. There is a self that is observing. That's the kind of metacognition element that we're talking about. And if we can engage that from a professional perspective, we can more readily add value to our context. These are key thinkers and researchers in the area of psychology and cognition. And what I'm trying to do is found our heuristic, our practice, our way of doing this on solid evidenced proposals. And what we have is listed John Vervaeke, a Canadian cognitive psychologist. We have Ian McGilchrist, a British psychologist and brain researcher. We've Bernardo Kastrup, who is based in Amsterdam and proposes through his foundation, he proposes the philosophy or philosophical worldview of analytic idealism, which is effectively that when we talk about consciousness, that there is an idea that can contain all ideas, that we can describe what reality is. Therefore, there is a greater set outside of reality, which is the ability to describe what reality is, or that there is an idea of what reality is. Effectively, very much summarizing, proposing that cognition is a form of consciousness, and consciousness is itself foundational. It is upon consciousness that everything emerges. Effectively talking about the collapsing of the wave function being the generation, so to speak, of the present moment, and that everything emerges from a field type energy into a particular energy. And that's part of consciousness. That's the conscious present moment that we're talking about, where everything is. Effectively, what we use this for is an empowering element, that if we can listen to a description like Kastrup's analytic idealism, that we can understand the sheer power of our imagination, simply from the perspective that our imagination is the fundamental, or is part of the fundamental ground of everything that analytic idealism refers to. That's the scale of your imagination. Okay, when we're talking about that massive scale, we have to be able to change our perspective within that space. So to go from inner consciousness to this massively expansive consciousness, where we can imagine deep interstellar space, distant stars and planets, and activities that might be going on, unrelated cultures and so on, different species. We can imagine all of these, crazy, zany things, but that requires us, from a professional perspective, to be able to do that sense of discovery with some sense of control, almost like we are, looking for oil or looking for gold, that we're doing it consciously and professionally. So moving out from John Vervaeke's 4Ps, this is the ways of knowing anything, ways of knowing our context and situation, and then moving through that situation with sovereignty and agency, making decisions about our life as we move forward through time effectively. So the 4Ps are listed here: participatory, perspectival, procedural, propositional. So these are ways of thinking, ways of looking. Participatory ways, where the knowledge relates to a community or somebody in addition to ourselves. Perspectival is the idea that we have a perspective or point of view, and that we acknowledge that others also do, and that we can relate to those quite well by using a perspectival shift technique. From the I to the other. We, again, as I've already said, there is a communitarian element to all of our lives. Obviously, we are born of a community most immediately, and that everything that we encounter is effectively generated by the commons. Procedural and propositional, both of these elements relate to how utility type of knowledge. So propositional is effectively, an idea or a fact. France's capital is called Paris. So that's effectively nuggets of knowledge. Procedural is about narratives related to knowledge effectively. So how we do things requires us to have individual concepts, such as a starting point and a goal, and then intermediate stages to procedurally arrive at that goal with some reliability or predictability. Future prediction is an important aspect of momentary awareness. Of course, we want to stay alive. We want to be able to predictively interact with the world around us. Sometimes we have to reactively interact with the world around us in moments of pressure and so on. But we're focusing here more on intentional, managed thinking rather than urgent or reactionary thinking. So we summarize these elements here with this concept of the ampersand. So ampersand is just a constant now. It's constantly now. So we begin and end with ampersand. And we pass through these different aspects because in any one moment, there's one or other of these elements effectively surfacing as a focal or necessary. And we is participatory, and I is perspectival. We also have the reference here to we and I because we is first, we is primary. I is always part of a we. Effectively, just to be born requires the preceding we to have existed. So that's why we do it in that sequence. And it also assists you in the multi-perspectival I. When you acknowledge immediately that you come from a we context, then immediately I can empathetically begin to interact with those others. And this and that. So, and this is, and this way, this method, this how I do something. Whereas the propositional is that I know exactly where to go because I've memorized the sequence of elements in my navigation plan. So propositional is really related to kind of facts, objective facts, effectively. Um, so again, we can relate some of these elements here to Ian McGilchrist's work and the hemisphere hypothesis. We have the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere, both handling much of what cognition requires of us, provides to us indeed, but doing it in different styles, and the styles align to our convergent and divergent thinking styles from our previous design thinking discussion, where, for example, the right hemisphere is more aligned with divergent, receiving, open, engaging, comprehending kinds of thinking, and the left hemisphere is this more like convergent thinking, coming to a point, coming to a gestalt, coming to a grasping and apprehension of our context, or a model within our context. It's really about focus, whereas the right hemisphere is really about relating. And again, what we're trying to do is align where we can so that we can kind of come back to this momentary awareness as a creative professional, where we understand that at any moment we are dominated by divergent or convergent thinking, and we can align that with the breath to make it more binary, where, for example, breathing out is more divergent, breathing in, coming to a point, is more convergent, and we can use that as a momentary awareness to check in, professionally speaking, on our mode in the moment, and then we can assess whether that's useful or productive, or maybe we need a break. Here we have a few of those kind of binary references. This one is more simple. This is kind of based on the idea that we might kind of just utter that, this little phrase as one type phrase. Wait, what? And that's where, for example, we have encountered something in our experience and generated a model of that. So we do understand it, but there's something that is unpleasant to us, or incomplete or challenging to us in the model. It's not that the model is unclear. It's that the model contains information that doesn't resonate with our existing experience. So there's a query, there's a need to know, there's a need to resolve. And that's what this moment here is. It's wait, what? And that's the concept that it's either or, because we move from one mode to the next. And these wait, what moments can be little chimes, little reminders, little alerts, present moment awareness from the perspective of creative practice. This is a design moment. That moment is composed of this duality that we speak about of divergence and convergence. So the wait element here is the divergent aspect, because we do have a model, but it needs more information. There's something about this model, we can see it clearly, but there's something about it that's incomplete. Maybe we need contrasting information. Maybe we need reinforcing information, but we're conscious that we need more information. And that's that moment of wait. And then what is trying to objectify what is that missing piece? How might the model shift with new information? So I'm really seeking information that fits or changes the model that I'm dealing with that is incomplete. Here now we have another simple two-word reference. Again, it gets back to the start of our conversation, really, where we talk about this idea of design thinking. And here what we're trying to do is really kind of use other elements of language to explain this. So diagnosis, we're familiar with the idea of a diagnosis in a medical context, and we know that it's a process. We know that it requires the doctor to have done examination, to gather information, to have a lexicon of knowledge against which he measures the new information, and then he expresses an opinion based on that assimilation, the combination of the present testing and observations with the existing canon of understanding and scientific awareness, and then we move on. And that's very much like a simple design or creative process, very much like it indeed. You could apply the design thinking process to medical diagnosis process. What we're also pointing out here is that buried within the etymology of the word diagnosis is very usefully this concept of gnosis. Equally within the word design, etymologically we can break that down. We can simply identify in green those elements which are really more about the core of creative thinking. From a professional perspective, we go from knowing to signaling. So gnosis is this old concept, I guess, of embodied knowledge, where you really know something. There's a felt sense of something. It's usually quite powerful, clarifying. It feels like truth, and that's something that's quite important to us. So knowing that deeply is what we're speaking about there. That would usually follow some kind of empathetic kind of moment where we have been open to receiving enough information to get that strong felt sense of knowing, that true understanding that gnosis relates to. It's more than simple fact. It really is more a sense of a felt sense of truth. So we have this relationship between diagnosis, which is the early stage of the design process, and then design. So that's about modeling, and it's about signaling. Okay, in order to signal, so sign, so design, and really it's the pronunciation that we use. We kind of speak the word or pronounce the word with a Z sound, design. But really, if we say design, its meaning is a bit more powerful. So design. So to design something is to signal something. In order to signal, there must be some content in the message. So embedded in the message is the model. Okay. The sign is the communication of the model. The understanding of that in the recipient is then your job is done. The communication is a model-based communication. You're transferring a model, a mental model. You're using signals to communicate that mental model, and then that model is being reconstructed in the audience, in the recipient of that message. If that reconstructed model matches your intent, you've done a good job. Well done. You're hired.